the only real cure for worry, as we'll come to, is decisive action. Get busy, take action, move forward. Negative imagination is thinking about things we don't want to happen that cause enormous amounts of stress and distress. In other words, we worry about things, we call it negative imagination, is we're imagining things that we don't even want to happen. So negative imagination, we say worry creates fear, which can be described as fantasized experiences appearing real. Fantasized experiences appearing real. Because here's some of the discoveries that they've done with regard to worry. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. It's a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. In other words, you're not in, you're not out. You do it, you don't do it. And so the only real cure for worry, as we'll come to, is decisive action. Get busy, take action, move forward. You see, the mind can only hold one thing at a time, positive or negative. If you get so busy working on your situation, you don't have time to worry anymore. A study was done on the things that people worry about. 40% of the worries people had never happened. 30% of the things were in the past for which nothing could be done. 12% were needless worries about health. And 10% were petty worries about little things. Did I park the car right? Did I leave my stuff in the car? Did I bring everything for the seminar? Only 8% of the worries were about something substantial, and of those, 4% were out of their control. So basically what we find is that 96% of what you worry about is a waste of emotion. There's a businessman who never worried about anything, and they said, "Why don't you worry?" He said, "I do worry." He said, "I worry for 1 hour every Saturday morning. And what I do during the week is when I think of something that I'm worried about, I write it on a piece of paper, and I put it into this box. And then I don't think about it till Saturday morning. At 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, I go and get out the box, and I just go through all the things I was supposed to worry about during the week. And surprise, surprise, by Saturday morning, 80-90% of them have disappeared." So he says, "I'm going to worry, just not now. I'm just going to worry. I'm going to have a worry time on Saturday morning." And as a result, he never ends up worrying. And you should do the same thing. Just take a little box or an envelope. Whenever you think of something you're worried about, write it on the envelope and say, "I'll have worry time on that later." But you'll notice if you get really busy, you forget to worry. You can be busy all day long and you forget to worry all day long. You think, "Oh my God, it's 5 o'clock. I haven't worried about that all day. I've got to get some wood on the fire. I've got to get it burning again. I've got to think about it and get myself worked up." So, to eliminate worry, live one day at a time. That's one of the great rules. Live one day at a time. Get the facts. Before you start worrying, there's a rule that says, "Just for today, I will remain calm. Just for today, I will not think about the things that make me upset." Just for today. And anybody can live one day at a time. In Dale Carnegie's famous book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, the very first day, he talks about living in day-tight compartments. The very first chapter, he says, the key to not worrying is to live one day at a time. And don't worry about things that may happen in the distant future. In the Bible, it said, "Sufficient unto the day are the cares thereof." So just be concerned about what's happening today, which is under your control. The second is to get the facts. Many times we get upset or angry about something or we worry about something because we don't have the facts. We have a half fact or we have a partial fact. And so the first thing you do is ask what exactly has happened. And you ask questions. And how has this happened? And what is the situation? And what's going on? And you find it is impossible to worry while you're asking questions and trying to get more information because of the law of substitution. So you focus on asking questions, and you ask several people what has happened here until you have a very clear idea, and very often you'll find there's nothing to worry about. Very often you'll find that what you thought you needed to be concerned about is really not a problem at all. In fact, you may have even had the wrong facts when you started worrying about it. The third thing you can do is use the worry buster technique. Now, the worry buster technique is one of the greatest techniques ever discovered. It's a life changer. It changes people's thinking forever. It's certainly been very helpful to me. You define the worry situation clearly in writing. So let us say that you're having severe financial problems. Then write down clearly, my problem is that I need X number of dollars by May 31st, and I only have X number of dollars, so I'm this many dollars short. In other words, get clarity about the worry situation. Many people are worried about something, but it's very vague and turbulent in the back of their mind. So when you're forced to think on paper, 50% of all worries are cured when you write down what you're worried about in the first place. If you're working with other people and you have 3 or 4 people in a discussion and you're all worried about something, you say, "All right, exactly what is it that we are worried about?" All 4 will have a different definition. So all four of you are trying to solve a problem situation, but none of you are really clear about what it is until you write it down. So we use a flip chart or a whiteboard and write it down so everybody agrees with the definition. Once everybody agrees with the definition, often the solution just pops out. The second thing that you do with the worry buster, and coming back to yourself as an individual, is determine the worst possible outcome of the situation. We call this the YPO, the WPO, worst possible outcome. What is the worst thing that can possibly happen as a result of this worry situation? And whatever it is, you say, well, it's something you can live with. It may even be the worst possible situation is that you'll die, all right? Now, if that's the worst possible thing that can happen, no matter what, well, then what you do is you say, all right, well, if that happens, it happens. And so number 3 is you resolve to accept the worst should it occur. We run out of money by the end of the month, or I could die from an incurable illness, or the house will burn to the ground or something else. So you say, okay, if it does happen, then I will accept it. And it's interesting, resistance to a negative situation is the major cause of stress. Once you say, okay, if it happens, it happens. You know, there's that famous story about George Burns. And let me see if I can... No, it wasn't George Burns, but it might as well have been George Burns. This older gentleman goes to his doctor. He's about 80 years old. Goes to his doctor and he wants to get a complete medical. And he also wants his fiancée to get a complete medical as well before they get married. His fiancée is 26. And he's about 80 years old and he's wealthy and she's 26 and obviously just a loving person. Anyway, the doctor looks at this situation and does the medical on both of them and he says, you know, Sam, could I talk to you? I've been your doctor for many years. He said, Sam, he said, you know, getting married at your age, you know that vigorous sexual activity can be fatal. And he said, well, he says, if she dies, she dies. In other words, resolve to accept the worst should it occur. If she dies, she dies. By the way, the George Burns story was he was 80 years old and they said, Mr. Burns, what would you like people to be saying about you 50 years from now? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? He said, well, 50 years from now, I want them to be saying, George Burns just happily celebrated his 130th birthday. Anyway, so resolve to accept the worst. The interesting thing is it's like deflating a balloon, is once you resolve to accept the worst, all the tension goes away. You don't have any tension and your mind clears and goes calm. Okay, the business goes broke, it won't kill me. If the house burns down, we get another house. If they lose all our money, we lose all our money. In other words, just accept it. And then, number 4, begin immediately to improve upon the worst. They teach this, by the way, in the universities. They call it the mini-max regret analysis. They say minimize the maximum possible regret. And so business people are taught, when they make a decision, is to say, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen here, and how can we minimize the maximum? How can we minimize the very worst thing that we do? So the worry buster is very powerful. Whenever you find yourself worried, say, wait a minute, what am I worried about? What's the worst possible outcome? What's the WPO here? And if you want to help other people, there's a wonderful observation. We say you become what you think about. You also become what you teach. And one of the fastest ways to internalize these ideas so that you think this way is to teach other people. When they have a situation of concern, say exactly what is it that you are worried about? And then what's the worst that could possibly happen? And so if that were to happen, would it kill you? If the answer is no, so now what could you do to improve upon the worst? J. Paul Getty was famous for saying whenever he went into a business deal, the first thing he would do is say, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? He said, and then make darn sure it doesn't happen. And he would have his executives make darn sure that the worst possible thing doesn't happen. So begin immediately to improve upon the worst. And sometimes by simply facing it squarely, you can solve the worry situation quickly. All right, worry is a form of negative goal setting. It's setting goals for things that you absolutely don't want to happen. Thinking and talking about what you don't want to happen. And remember the law of cause and effect, the law of attraction, law of correspondence, law of belief, all these laws are neutral. They work with devastating effect on negative goals, just like they work with wonderful effect on positive goals. So if you're really worried about something, actually you're setting up a force field of energy to attract that into your life. There are some people who seem to always have bad luck. They seem to always have difficulties in their lives. Well, when you talk to them for 5 minutes, you know why. Because that's all they talk about. All they think about is possible negative things that could happen. Or negative things that have already happened that they can't do anything about, which they just keep rehashing. 6, worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. One of the most powerful techniques, which we talked about, is decisiveness. Make a decision. You'll learn tomorrow why decisiveness is so important. But decisiveness is so powerful. It gives you so much control. And the only real antidote to worry is purposeful action. So what I want you to do is use the law of substitution. Law of substitution says get so busy working on your goals that you don't have time to worry. And the interesting thing is that if you get so busy working on a goal, minimizing the worst that can happen, soon you reach the point where you just don't worry anymore. Remember, worry is something you probably learned from a parent. One of your parents taught you to worry because they worried all the time. And they worried about little things and big things and little things and big things. And you grew up with a worldview that worried is what you do when you're an adult. And the other thing is, the higher your self-esteem, the more you like yourself, the less you worry about things. People who worry about things think that if something goes wrong, it's a reflection on them. Something fails or it doesn't work out. And you have to say, no, if things just don't work out, it's not a reflection on you. Just because you fail when you try something, which is much better than trying nothing, doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that you're a learner. Interesting point in America. Some of the most admired people in America are the entrepreneurs who started from nothing and built great fortunes. 3 or 4 who come to mind are, of course, Bill Gates, and then Warren Buffett and Larry Ellison of Oracle, and Michael Dell, and then the Waltons. 5 of the Bill Walton or Sam Walton's descendants are among the 5 richest people in the world. Nobody knows how, but he was able to split his entire $100 million worth of fortune amongst 4 kids and 1 wife, $20 million each. And nobody knows how, and the documents, all the trust documents were sealed. No taxes. Everything passed straight to his relatives with no taxes, none of those massive 55% taxes. And they sealed the agreement with the IRS. I don't know what it was. They sealed it, and nobody's ever been able to see it. Did you know that? That's one of those factoids, little facts of very little value, but nice to have. The interesting thing about these people is that these are successful entrepreneurs, and everybody's happy about them. In America, we really, really admire people who try and fail. We were talking about this the other day. If somebody tries a business and you meet them a year later, said, how'd your business go? I said, it went bust, lost everything. Geez, you say, wow, that must have been a great experience. What did you learn? What are you going to do next? In other words, there's no negativity about going broke in a business. The only person who feels really bad about it is probably you. For other people, what they're going to have for lunch is more important than the fact that you are bankrupt and living out of your car. What we do is we admire successful people. We admire them and we look at learning from them. In Italy, if you start a business, like even a barbershop, and you go broke, it's published in the paper like you're a criminal wanted for child molestation. Yes, this is what you did. It's an awful thing. It's an embarrassment to your family. You often have to leave that city and go and live somewhere else. You're not allowed to start another business for 10 years because you went broke in your business. In other words, it's a real badge of shame to have tried a business and started. That's why the level of entrepreneurship in European countries is very low. Whereas here, you can start a business, go broke on Friday, start a new one on Monday. And you can start it online for $49.95 with LegalZoom, and you're in business. Even before you can get business cards printed, which you can do online as well. and you could be in business on Monday morning. There, you may have to stay on the sidelines for a decade before you're allowed to start another business. So therefore, never be concerned about failing, and never let the possibility of failing hold you back. Which brings us to programming your mind for success. But before we do that, I'd like you to fill out this little exercise here and write down the worry situation, the things that you're worried about, and they're basically, 4 or 5 categories. They're your relationships with other people, they're money, business, they have to do with health, they have to do with sales, income, and maybe things that have to do with other people and not in your business. So write down 3 to 5 things that you are worried about, and write down the worst possible thing that could happen. What's the worst that could happen if everything went to hell in a handbasket? And then fill out number 2. What specific steps will you take immediately to improve upon the worst possible outcomes in the first 3 above? What specific things will you do? What decisions will you make? What will you get into or get out of? And then finally, what one action are you going to take immediately to stop worrying and start living? One last point with regard to worry or negativity of any kind. Vince Lombardi once wrote these wonderful words. He said, "Fatigue doth make cowards of us all." And if we get really tired or worn out, especially physically tired or emotionally tired because we're in an emotionally stressful situation, and you get worn out, everything becomes exaggerated. You become more worried about small worries, you become angrier about small irritations, you become more depressed about reversals, you become fatalistic and think about quitting. So sometimes the very best thing you can possibly do is to just shut it all off and get a good night's sleep. Just go to bed early and just get a good night's sleep, and just sleep 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 hours. Everybody's had the experience where they just say, I don't have to get up tomorrow morning, I'm just going to sleep until I can't sleep anymore. You sleep 10 hours, and you can hardly believe it. And then all of those things that were bothering you the day before, well, they weren't really that important. So sometimes it's really important to get lots and lots of rest. In the Jewish religion, there's what is called a Sabbath. And it's been one of my favorite concepts for years. There was a wonderful book written on it by a Jewish scholar about the Sabbath. And a Sabbath is they stop work at 6 o'clock on Friday, and then they take all of Saturday as the Sabbath, and they don't do anything. Now, they don't work, they don't catch up on their books, they don't even do anything intense. They just relax, spend time with the family, maybe in our time go for a walk, go to a movie, and so on. And it keeps going for 36 hours. It goes till 6 o'clock Sunday morning. And so what that means is you get 2 really good sleeps. I always think of sleeps. How many sleeps did you get? When Barbara and I go on a vacation, we find that you've got to be away for at least 2 sleeps. You can't go on a vacation on Saturday to a nice place, sleep there Sunday, and come back and then come back Sunday. It's not enough time for a vacation. 3 sleeps is better, but 2 sleeps is the minimum. But a Sabbath gives you 2 sleeps. It gives you 2 full nights of sleep where you completely relax, and you'll find that if after that 36 hours, the whole world looks different. You're much more relaxed, you're more positive, you see more possibilities, you're more creative, you see things that you can do, you have the energy to take actions, and so on. So sometimes if you get really tired or if you get burned out emotionally because of a stressful situation, the smartest thing you can do is nothing. Just relax, just back off and get lots and lots of sleep. It'll really help you. Okay, moving right along here, programming your mind for success. You know that a computer, if you program a computer, it simply operates on the basis of the computer, on the basis of the programming. If you want to get different results in your outer world, you have to put in a different program for your mental programmer. So this is how we do it. We say your self-concept is your bundle of beliefs inside that determines everything that happens to you. Remember, all change begins with a change in your self-concept, the way you see yourself and think about yourself and believe about yourself. There was a man many years ago, very famous, true story. His name was Victor Sarabriakov. And I learned this story from Zig Ziglar. And Victor Sarabriakov was the parent of immigrant laborers who came over from Russia. And he grew up and he went to school. And he seemed to float through school. He did whatever schoolwork was necessary, but he daydreamed a lot, and sometimes he read other things and looked out the window. And they concluded that he was probably mentally retarded, he had learning deficiencies, wasn't really set up to be very successul, and so he was just passed through on the never, never, never get failed plan, you know, where they just keep passing the problem kids on to the next grade and it doesn't come back. And so he went all the way up to the 10th, 12th grade, and he was still looking out the window, and he sat down with his counselor in the 12th grade, and they suggested that he join the Army. Because in the Army, he could get a nice job, you know, cleaning latrines or being a carpenter or driving a truck, where they would provide for him for 25 or 30 years, and then he could have a nice pension, and he could retire, and he would be safe and secure. And he didn't think much about that, so he left school and he drifted, and he worked as a farm laborer, and he worked as a janitor, and he worked cleaning up motels, and he just drifted across the country. And one day, when he was down on his luck, about 2 years later, he'd been drifting around, he's now about 20 years old, he saw a sign, you know, the Army needs men. And he remembered the recommendation from his guidance counselor in high school So he went in and he applied to enroll, to register, what do they call it, to sign up for the Army. Pardon? To enlist, yes, to enlist, thank you. So he went in to enlist, and they said fine, and his background was average grades in high school and labor for 2 years, not great Army material. So they gave him a battery of psychological and intelligence tests. When they came back with the tests, his IQ scored at 172. And they said, no, there's something wrong here with this test, this score. So they tested him again. They had him take the test again, came out at 176. His IQ was higher than Einstein's of 170. They couldn't believe it. They took him in and they sat him down and they said, Mr. Serebryakov, you're one of the smartest. You're the smartest person who's ever tried to enlist in the Army. And he said, yeah, but I got terrible grades throughout school. And they had a psychologist there, and he said, well, it's because you basically have a photographic memory. You memorized everything there was to learn in school. The instant it was first mentioned, it was completely boring for you. That's why you were looking out the window all the time. He said, that's true. He said, I never failed an exam because he learned everything like a sponge absorbs water. They said, Mr. Serebryakov, if you'll join the Army and you'll go into our nuclear physicist training, we will put you through university if you will stay in the Army for 4 years after your degree. And he said, sounds good to me. And so he did. He went through, first of all, he had to retake high school. He finished all of high school in a year, took 4 years of university, very tough courses in 18 months, took the PhD in a year and a half, and he had his PhD by the time he was 25 and a half years old. Then he went to work for the Army for 4 years. While he was there, he developed 2 or 3 new technologies, defense technologies, that 2 of which the Army was very interested in. The others said, we're not interested in this. When his time was up at 30, he started his own company, which is in Los Angeles, and Serebryakov Industries. Within something like 2 years, he had 6 major high-tech patents, each of which was sold and licensed for millions of dollars. By the time he was 35, he still lives in Los Angeles today. He's worth millions and millions of dollars. One of the brightest people that they'd ever seen in terms of his creative ability. But he didn't know. He'd been programmed from his poor parents and his poor kids in his childhood and the teachers that paid no attention to him to believe he was not very smart. And when they finally showed him how smart he was, he just changed his programming. When he changed his programming, this guy became a mental machine. He was a genius of the highest order. So it's very possible for us to change all of our external results by changing our programming about ourselves.